So hello everyone and welcome along to Susty Talk, Edie's new video series of video interviews put together to keep our audience of sustainability and energy professionals talking, feeling connective and optimistic and just a little bit sane during this unprecedented period of lockdown here in the UK and beyond. And that beyond bit is very important for today's episode. I'm Edie's content editor, Matt Mace, and joining me for this episode of Susty Talk, we have Anna Pierce, the Director of Sustainability at the food ingredients firm Tate Lyle. Anna, how are you today?
I'm doing well. It's 6 a.m. on the East Coast, so it's too early not to be doing well. But thank you for having me, Matt. It's nice to virtually meet you.
Yeah, no, you too. The weather looks amazing out there for 6 a.m. So I suppose that's one of the benefits of me kind of dragging you up early to do this interview. So apologies and thank you for accommodating time into a busy schedule to talk to me this morning from where you are. How has lockdown been for you over there then, Anna, in terms of just being able to work on sustainability for Tate Lyle? Has it been a bit disruptive? Has it been a relatively seamless transition?
For me, it's been a relatively seamless transition, primarily because I've worked remotely from home for at least a decade now. So the day after lockdown was a bit of a typical day, with the exception that I had my children home and no nanny. So it all kind of, the personal side of work and my life hit. But I feel like at the same time, Tate & Lyle rolled out a lot of new online tools and ways to connect with each other. So being a home-based employee, it felt like an enhanced version of what we were already doing because I could connect with others so much more easily. With Microsoft Teams, seeing people on video, and I got to know a lot of my coworkers on a more personal level, right? Their kids are popping in, their dogs are barking. So it makes things a little bit more informal, even when you're talking about very formal topics, which is nice. It's nice to get to know people that way.
And in terms, I mean, one of the issues I've found quite problematic for myself, as I mentioned before, I'm kind of cooped up in this little 2-bedroom apartment. I don't have the joys of sitting outside in the nice weather to do these types of interviews. But in such a small place for me, I work at a kind of desk in front of my kitchen, which you can just see in the background. And then when I finish work, I can walk about 10 yards to the living room, and that's where I kind of unwind. And it's so hard sometimes to separate work from just kind of downtime and private life. And I think a lot of professionals are probably having that issue when you are working from home. The temptation is probably there to work all the time. So what advice have you had to be able to kind of break up the day and make sure that it's not kind of all consuming aspects?
Fortunately for me now, the break in the day is my children. So it's difficult to not stop working and do that. But there was a very good time in my life and portion of my life that I would work seemingly nonstop. So you'd start work at 6 or 7 a.m. and it's 6 or 7 p.m. and you're still working and you don't know what happened. You kind of don't have a social life. It's not a healthy place to be, both professionally and just from a mental health standpoint for a long period of time, right? We all can do it in short bursts, but not in this huge COVID time where everyone's kind of cooped up and says, oh, let me catch up on everything I've ever needed to do. I think it was really helpful for me to schedule something to stop my day. So if it's, it used to be going to the gym or meeting friends out for dinner, but I think even if that's a call to your parents or FaceTime with someone or virtual cocktails, something that at the end of the day, you have to close your laptop and say, enough, I have somewhere to be, even if that somewhere is virtually. It's that commitment. Otherwise, you do find yourself working nonstop, which isn't good.
No, definitely. Although a lot of sustainability professionals that I've spoken to, that's they don't consider it work. It is a passion point, and they'll happily do the kind of internal work, but actually they're quite happy to look beyond their own walls and just discuss this kind of climate movement as well.
I think there's so many more people to discuss it with. So because of everything being locked down during COVID, you can start to look outside, right? You see the before and after pictures on air quality, on dolphins in Venice, right? So there's a lot to discuss about sustainability for people that may have not been closely following it for years. Now they're part of this discussion, and I think it's a great opportunity to very lightly debate and talk and educate others that aren't immersed in sustainability 24/7 like we all are.
No, yeah, that's very true. I think more people are falling kind of back in love with nature in that sense.
Yeah.
And Anna, it's a good time to be talking to you. I think it is a little under, around about 2 weeks ago, where Tate Lyle, it's a 160-year-old business as well, one of the first kind of multinationals, kind of set new environmental targets for 2030. So by that point, 170-year-old business, to reduce operational emissions by 30% by 2030, 15% reduction in value chain emissions as well. How have those targets been received since they were kind of publicly announced?
They've been really well received. So we are also in the process of pursuing science-based targets. So we're dotting I's and crossing the T's on our application to get the details sent in. We certainly have committed to it. Apologies for the air travel overhead. Apparently there are still a few people flying, although it's none of us. The targets have been really well received. I mean, we spent the better part of a year talking about what were the specific targets, why were they our targets, both with our leaders as well as our board. And we kept kind of coming back and asking ourselves, is it enough? In 10 years' time, when we look back, will we have felt like we had done enough? Or were our targets maybe not as far-reaching as they should be, or challenging as they should be? If you set a target and you know exactly that you can hit it, and you can hit it 5 years early, that's not a target, right? That's a sure bet. So we kept having this internal dialogue where we all pushed ourselves to say, what should we be doing, not what can we do? And it led to some really in-depth discussions on sustainability, certainly, but then also just the planning around it and how are we going to execute this, and where do we need more engagement to drive change? So we feel really good about the targets.
And obviously, this has been, the target set's probably been a long-term thing. I guess it's kind of average for at least 2 years to be working on these kind of targets. But has the pandemic slowed the unveiling of this? Were you always hoping to kind of come out at this time with these targets, or did the coronavirus change any kind of momentum around the targets, or was it kind of just, nope, we can carry on, we're ready to go?
So the coronavirus did not change the timing of the announcement of the targets or the targets themselves. We always knew they were going to come out at year-end results. We were going to start to discuss them in a little bit more depth in our annual report that's coming out soon. We received board approval, final approval in March. So that timeline was always very much there. I don't necessarily think anything's been accelerated because of COVID, but I'll also say that at this point, nothing's been slowed down because of COVID. So we can't see into the future, but as of now, these are our targets. Everybody's working on it. And we all kind of take those steps forward to execute the projects related to the targets. I think in some cases, executing some of those projects or gathering teams to talk through something sometimes is seamless on Microsoft Teams, right? We all just kind of do it. And then I think other times there's schedule challenges and home life interrupts things, and it's hard to kind of get that sense of, let's have a big working group talk about something when you have 30 people on a Microsoft team. So I think that there's challenges to come, but in announcing the targets and kind of finalizing them, it's been going as planned.
Okay, that's good to hear. And you mentioned science-based targets a minute ago, and I think that's been a movement that's really picked up steam probably since kind of at least 2018, and then kind of off the back of the IPCC report that came out then as well. So many people realised the need, or organisations even realised the need to go down the science-based route and have those targets that are aligned to the needs of the planet. And here in the UK, in relation to the coronavirus pandemic, the government insists it's being led by science. There's some questions as to whether that's the case, but it's the mantra they're kind of trotting out right now. And we're just kind of seeing this, I suppose, real kind of alignment of civil society, businesses, and politicians all alike, all of a sudden heeding the warnings of scientists and turning to them for advice. How important is it in this era to be led by the science and not just kind of set targets that kind of sound nice, or as you mentioned, that could be kind of, as you mentioned, that they're essentially just a shortcut?
I think it's incredibly important. So it's very difficult, even with our own employees internally, but especially when you start to talk externally about your targets. Well, what does that mean? Is that enough for your company? Is that not enough? Was that something easy for you, or is this a big stretch that you're really, really working hard to make a change? And for us, I think the science-based targets add a level of credibility to your approach and to the targets that you're setting, that yes, you are working in an ambitious way to tackle climate change. So I think even if there's people that aren't as close to it or don't know all of the projects, or the annual reduction versus your competitors or versus other companies in the marketplace when consumers are making those decisions, at the end of the day, when it's a science-based target, they can recognize that and say, okay, they're doing something, and I think what they're doing is enough. So for us, it was very important to lean back on science, because it is actually the truth in this, right? Science is real. It's nice that we're leaning back into science again to make some of these decisions.
No, that's very true. And some aspect of the science-based target, I think it's for companies over a certain size. They have to set that kind of scope 3 target, which is still a bit of a new frontier for businesses. I think the traditional sustainability targets were very much kind of focused on operational scope 1 and 2, and now people are starting to realize that actually there's not just an opportunity but also kind of a duty to look outside your own 4 walls, down the value chain, across your kind of staff and stakeholders as well, and really influence change there. Obviously Tate Lyle have that 15% target for 2030. How challenging is a scope 3, well, that's not necessarily scope 3, but a value chain target compared to operational, which you have much more control over?
So I'll, full transparency, we were setting our science-based targets, working on the final pieces of our assessment with our consultants, and they came back and said, scope 3 can't be qualitative, it has to be quantitative. And we all said, okay, let's jump into the deep end. For us, the majority of our scope 3 emissions come from procuring corn, right? Corn is our largest procured ingredient or raw material. We procure the equivalent of 1.5 million acres of corn globally every year. It's a lot of corn. It also has a pretty significant environmental footprint when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. So we partnered in 2018 on a pilot, and then expanded that in 2019 to include the full 1.5 million acres with a company called Terra. It's previously part of Land O'Lakes Sustain, to enroll acres into the program. And we did that very quickly. We did that in 4 months, because it's not really about chasing acres. It's about chasing the change that you can make once you have the data on the acres. So we're working with the Terra team and their ag retailers, which are the experts that the growers reached out to say, hey, I want to switch my farming practice. I want to use a new conservation practice. I need new equipment. I need different fertilizer. I need soil samples, right? All of that technical expertise, they're also giving them advice and guidance on conservation practice adoption. So we're starting to see really nice results in the pilot program. We got our first year-over-year results on acres that were enrolled in the program both years, right? So you really want to see, are we having an impact? And we saw about a 10% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions year over year on 148,000 acres. So that partnership and deepening that partnership to include our customers and other key stakeholders, like some of the government agencies, universities, and really kind of leaning into everyone in the value chain, is a very large part of how we plan to achieve that 15% reduction in scope 3 emissions.
Okay, that's good to know. And on that as well, then, we've seen lots of narrative around this new normal, calls for a green recovery globally, and US in the same as well. And a lot of it has very much been focused on kind of pivoting stimulus packages towards low carbon tech, renewables, hydrogen, low carbon and gas. obviously agriculture is a huge source of global emissions. I think around 40%. I haven't seen too much, but perhaps I just haven't been looking on that. But I haven't seen too much of the talk about actually pivoting a lot of that to more sustainable agricultural practices. Where do you see, or how do you see agriculture changing in this new normal, this ideal new normal that we're looking for anyway, one that's built on a green recovery?
I mean, I think the growers, first of all, they've been on this journey of conservation for decades. So this isn't this brand new shiny topic that they didn't know about before. It's something I think a lot of us maybe haven't thought about before, known about before, as consumers, as companies, as those that are procuring their ingredients. But the growers have been doing this, and when we talk to them, they want more support, right? They're literally betting the family farm on, I'm going to now spend my money and put in cover crops. Is that the right thing for me? Is that the right thing for all of my farm, one of my fields? Those are the types of questions that I think the more expertise that we can help enable them to be able to contact and reach out to and network with, I think that's what drives change. There's a huge economy and a lot of politics involved with agriculture in the U.S. And I think, at the end of the day, we need to support the growers and make sure that they're not only doing the right thing from an environmental standpoint, but they're also profitable, right? They're not losing their family farms to be, more environmentally friendly, if you will. And I think that balance has to go hand in hand. And I think that balance can be translated to a lot of industries, right? You should be environmentally responsible, but do it in a way that you're also not bankrupting your company or your family farm, right? There's a balance to strike.
Yeah, I think that notion that sustainability had always been a premium that needs to be attached is slowly starting to dissolve away as it becomes a bit more market ready, which is good. And on the calls for a green recovery, I mean, obviously we're UK based. Our Prime Minister's come out and reiterated that it's definitely going to be a green recovery. The EU has definitely, they set 25% of their kind of multi-billion pounds budget to the green recovery. What has the narrative around a green recovery been like in the US? Has it been as strong?
I would say not. I think there's a lot of distraction going on in the US right now. There's a lot of issues around racism. There's a lot of issues with COVID. The politics in the US is probably makes for very good television at best on most evenings. So I don't think environmentalism has gotten this shining spotlight that it could or should have. But you will see in major publications and press a lot around the before and after pictures, right? This was New York. This is New York today. You'll see LA, you'll see national parks. So I think it's in people's minds, and certainly it's in the minds of all of the companies in the States, right? It's a big year. It's the turn of the decade. A lot of us are all setting new sustainability targets and having those conversations. I just don't think it's as coordinated as I would say the response that we see from Europe. There's definitely a heavy push from Europe. And I think it's nice to see that, right? It's nice to see that level of organization and really pushing everyone to do just that much better.
No, I agree, and yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head where you mentioned that actually the businesses are still setting the targets, even if that perhaps that legislative focus is missing. I think the private sector is very much driving the agenda, which it's proven time and time again that can work. That's great. You mentioned science-based targets is a thing you're working on. I imagine that's going to be taking up a lot of your time. But is there anything else that's kind of on the horizon for you in the sustainability area for the remainder of the year?
The remainder of the year, really, we're focusing on a little bit of a more in-depth look at our Scope 3 emissions, right? So we had that initial analysis of Scope 3 in order to set the science-based targets, right? And have an informed discussion, particularly as now that's a quantitative target. But then we kind of went back and said, okay, let's take a deeper look beyond corn. Let's really understand the sources of these emissions and how internally we can change some of our processes or work with some of our customers to really measure that impact and make sure that we're measuring it in a reliable way. that can go through a limited assurance audit and statement, just like the scope 1 and 2 emissions. So we're going to be spending a portion of this year working on getting a bit deeper look in scope 3.
Okay, good stuff.
It's the great unknown, right? It's all the other stuff. So we gotta dig through that a little bit more.
Good to know. I won't keep any more of your time, Anna. I don't think I've been up that early during since lockdown happened. I certainly haven't been getting up at 6 a.m. So I do appreciate you doing that to come speak to me, and for being such a great guest on this new series.
Thank you so much for having me. It's COVID times, right? So you gotta flex your schedule, and this works out great. So thank you again.
No, thank you, and to everyone that has been tuning in. Susty Talk, as I mentioned, is going to continue to run throughout lockdown, probably beyond. We don't know what this new normal looks like yet in terms of our work schedules. So there will be more episodes in the pipeline. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay positive, and keep up the Susty Talk.